All right, welcome. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Shaping the Future, Policy Considerations for AI in Higher Education. We look forward to an exciting hour here of dialogue across our panel, who I'll introduce in just a moment, but also as much dialogue as possible from you. We want to make this an active engagement session, so please keep using the chat. We'll also be using a couple other tools during the session to engage you, get your thoughts, and capture ideas from you as well. Throughout our session, let's see, we're recording this. We'll share the link with you. We'll also share all of the resources in the follow-up. So you'll have access to the slides and you'll have access to the things that we'll be sharing in the chat, as well as a Padlet. Let's see, with Zoom also, with everything that's been talked about in the last week, I want to assure you that we're not using Zoom IQ. We're not using your data. We're not training for Zoom. So everything is safe here within this session. We will be posting the recording, but we're not using your data to train LLM. So that's just one thing I wanted to get out of the way as far as housekeeping. Introducing myself, I'm Brett Christie. I'm VP for Educational Innovation and Inclusivity at Alchemy. And so I do a lot of work in steering the resources that we're developing in our platform, the tools and resources and experiences that we develop for educators, just to really help them move their teaching effectiveness forward and enabling more and more students to be successful. So that's been my role. Prior to that, 25 years in higher education at the campus and system level for the Cal State system. So great to be with you here again today. And then let's look at our series on artificial intelligence. So this is the fourth in a series that we've been doing, and we have one in mind based on feedback that we got from participants last time. But you can see we talked about a general opening of the conversation back in May on ChatGPT in higher education, when things were still so new for most folks, and still for many it is new today. And then we talked about what we might expect this fall and how to prepare. And so we had a great a demonstration there on some of the key things to get ready for. And then last time we really focused on assignments and assessments, and we had a great interactive session and demonstration session from Danny Liu, University of Sydney, on August 2nd. And of course, here we are today. We're looking at adding another one in the near future based on feedback on asynchronous courses and how to manage AI with asynchronous courses and asynchronous activities and assessments, because that can be a complex one. So look forward to that in the near future. And then I'll get introducing our panel for today, and then we'll kick it off. So Melody Buckner, I'll introduce first. Melody, I got to know at an AI summit last month, and we happened to sit together at a table in a working group and had a great conversation and experience throughout today. And so I invited Melody based on getting to know her, but also her role at University of Arizona. So she's Associate Vice Provost there for Digital Learning Initiatives and Online. She's been in that role since 2019, working with university leaders and faculty and staff to help articulate implementation of online education and digital learning. Her discipline background is in the College of Education. She's done research and teaching in areas of educational technology, digital and creative literacies, and multicultural education. Her informal education consists of living in over 40 different places, including several countries and overseas. And today she's actually joining us from an undisclosed location. I'll let her share more about that if she wants to. Kind of an inside thing there. And then Van Davis. I've known Van for the last couple of years through the different WCET events and that we've been part of. And Van was also a key individual for hosting and putting on the AI summit that I mentioned that took place last month in Denver. He's Chief Strategy Officer for the WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technologies. He's been in that role since 2021 and also works in a key role for Every Learner Everywhere. All told, he has 25 years of experience in higher ed as faculty member, academic administrator, state policymaker, and ed tech leader. His background also includes a PhD in U.S. history, 20th century. And then Jim Larimore, who I've gotten to know over the last 6 months or so. Jim is the co-founder and chairperson for the EdSafe AI Alliance, Jim's leading a global consortium that brings together educators, innovators, researchers, organizations, and experts in policy to ensure the safe, equitable, and trusted use of AI for education. Jim's also served as a student affairs leader at several campuses across the country in the past. And then last, who I'll turn it over to, is Carrie O'Donnell. And Carrie is our founder and CEO for Alchemy. Carrie's had the company for over 30 years now, and that's based on this vision of innovation that she's had for technology and education that whole time, and is continually moving forward as things change, and is always looking at the next step. What can be done next to enable educators, to enable the learning experience and student success? So Carrie's been a great visionary for that effort over the last 30 plus years. And so Carrie's going to be our moderator for today's session. I also want to mention that Carrie also has started, as of 6 months ago, a Change Makers in Higher Education podcast, and we'll give you the link for that as well. So far, she's had a set of great speakers on very interesting topics. And so you'll see that list at the link here, and you can find that, of course, on Apple and on Spotify. All right, at this time, I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everyone, and I'm so excited to engage in this conversation with this just great panel of people who are as expert as any of us can be in AI and education. But we've been talking a lot about AI in the classroom, and I think at this we wanted to elevate the conversation to be more about really how institutions can approach this in a more systematic way. And so while we use the word policy in the topic for this, we do understand that guidelines are more frequent than policy, right? And that but this group here has got a lot to say about it. So today's conversation, just want to give a little bit about the framework. We're just going to hear a little bit. Each of our panelists has a little different role and perspective in AI. And then from there, we're also going to look at issues of governance, issues related to tackling privacy, security, and accountability, issues of operational factors. How do you operationalize the effective and safe use of AI? Training is a really huge issue that comes up in a lot of the research, and that's going to come up in this conversation today. And then also we will talk about pedagogical considerations as you set guidelines and policies in the institution. Van's team at WCET did a really great groundbreaking study on the campus AI strategy and maturity, and on how it's used and how it's not used, and how many institutions really haven't figured out what they need to do, which is most institutions, right? And that there's a link to that report here, and I'm sure that Van is going to he will refer to it during our conversation. But I just wanted to start out the panel discussion with this slide here, which is when asked about their overarching AI strategy at the institution, more than half of the respondents, and I'm not speaking specifically to, but you had Van, over 500 respondents on this survey, and over half of them said their institutions have no overarching strategy. That a good portion, almost a third, have some sort of a strategy projects going on. And we're seeing this, O'Donnell Learn has about, 70 plus partner institutions, and we're seeing a lot of them are doing small projects to kind of explore AI and bring teachers and faculty and administrators together to kind of think about what that should look like. So we're anxious to hear from all of you. The chat is already going strong, and so we're anxious to hear from all of you today and hear what you're doing at your institutions. But I think we're going to take off the slide set and turn it into the discussion now, and turn to the wisdom of the great team we've got here today. So first off, I want to start with a question for each of the panelists about what opportunities do you see when it comes to higher ed today? And maybe Van, we could just start with you because we just showed some research that your team has published, et cetera.
Sure, Terry, and thank y'all for having me this morning or this afternoon, depending upon where you are. I think that there's a lot of opportunities. Some of the things that I think we are the most interested in and think probably provide the greatest opportunity actually has to do around learner access, whether that be 24/7 access to tutorial chatbots, or I think that there's actually some really interesting usages of generative AI for learners who have accessibility issues as well. There was a great op-ed piece done by a faculty member in Inside Higher Ed earlier this year who talked about how they were using, in this case, ChatGPT to assist them with their ADHD. So I think that there's some really interesting opportunities around learner access. I think there's some really interesting opportunities as well in terms of really opening up conversations around critical thinking. I think institutions are going to really need to double down on critical thinking, and that this actually may make the humanities and the social sciences much more relevant as we think about how students and eventually employees are interacting with generative AI.
It's great. Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I love the fact that Van has started off where he did, especially as I think about the issues around what role technology can play in addressing accessibility issues, equity issues, really helping us to think about how we improve learning and the teaching and learning process. I think there are some corollary elements to that around potential innovations and measurement. So different ways that you might be able to assess critical thinking and coming up with more consistent approaches to that. I think that will surface some questions about our current systems for evaluating student work or grading and so on. I also think that as a former university leader, that this is a time where we really need our universities and especially our university faculty to contribute to this broader societal discussion about the ethical use of technology, how AI is put together. I think that faculty is the highly trained group of professional skeptics can help reveal what AI is and what it is not, because there's so much hyperbole and hype out in the marketplace now. And by extension, I would say that creates some opportunities for us to have ethically informed policy development so that we think carefully about elevating those issues. I hope that might also, as a byproduct, help to restore some public confidence in higher education.
Awesome. And Melody.
Good morning, everyone. I have to apologize. I am broadcasting from a campsite because I escaped Arizona the last week before we all come back to campus. So I'm in beautiful Southern Colorado. If my internet goes bad, I may just go to you won't see me anymore. You'll just hear me. But at any rate, I love what you guys have shared with access and accessibility. I think that is like key. That's a key thing that we need to consider when using any kind of technology, including AI. I am going to share with you because I come from a research university, and hopefully this is a public site. I don't know. I may be sharing something with you that's secret, but at any rate, I'm sharing our artificial intelligence page. At the University of Arizona, we're a research university. We have 18 colleges. We have a lot of stakeholders. Jim, I loved how you said that we should bring all people into this conversation. And that's exactly what we did this summer. I think there are some great opportunities. I love that you're leading with opportunities instead of challenges, because I think when you lead with opportunities, the challenges kind of solve themselves. I also think that policy should be written in pencil. I'm kind of a girl that likes to color outside of the lines, so I tend to get in trouble a lot, but I also need those lines to help guide me as we are thinking about these important kind of issues that not only our faculty and our administrators have to wrestle with, but our students have to wrestle with them as they go into their first career. And we really need to provide them opportunities for how they can be educated and be really good citizens when they take on their first job and have knowledge of how to use artificial intelligence and other technologies within their own field. So I hope that answers the question.
That's great. I think so. So we decided, in terms of looking at challenges, to bring that one out to the larger audience. So Brett, come on back on screen. Brett's going to lead us in. Anyone, by the way, there are a few hundred new people here on this particular webinar that haven't been to some of our other webinars. So welcome. And Brett's going to take you into a answer garden activity. So here you go, Brett.
Great. Let me get that link here. Bear with me one moment.
So Answer Garden is basically it's a live word cloud. And so we're going to ask you to put in a few words or a short phrase or a word, what you see as the challenges, and we'll build it into a word cloud and take about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes to do that. And then that'll be the challenge part of the discussion. And then we'll go right into, what are people doing? What does policy look like? So go to chat and you'll see the Answer Garden link.
That tandem of plagiarism, ethics, and cheating, of course, comes together. That's where there has been a lot of attention. We can certainly break that down.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're hoping in this conversation, well, the reason we let in with opportunities is we want to get beyond just the discussion of the important discussion of academic integrity to other elements of AI, because AI is here to stay. And
And we see bias and biases. Those are important to acknowledge and look out for as we integrate AI. I like the term authenticity. That's where we can really focus on keeping the human aspect. And that's where, if we're really digging into authenticity of student work and the learning experience, that's where we can find a good balance of using AI. Okay, I'll do one last refresh and then we'll jump from here. It's meant to be just a quick snapshot exercise, and this will be an example of another resource that we'll capture and share with you at the end.
by the way, in advancing our active learning cause, Answer Garden's a really great way to get a quick read of a room. It's a free tool, and you can use it in the classroom. So.
And there's our respective counts there. Okay, Carrie, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, so I want each, we really carefully chose our panelists today because each of you brings a really great perspective to the table. And so I would like each of you to do that. And I'm gonna, this is not a panel where we're gonna go around the room the whole time, but just at the beginning here. So Melody, I'd love you to start by talking to us about, I think right after we've talked about opportunities and challenges, hear how you're building policy and or guidelines around AI at University of Arizona.
Yeah, thanks. So all summer, we did have a group of people that were coming together in committees talking about the different challenges and opportunities we would have, and also about how we're going to guide our faculty on how to use or how to talk to their students about AI. If you go to that website that I shared, and thanks for sharing that, I only shared it with the panel, so thanks for sharing that out to everyone. And you go to the About Us, you'll see all of the committees that were formed. So we really are thoughtful in bringing in the community together to talk about this. And this is going to be an ongoing conversation that's going to be happening this fall. We started out by directing, because faculty are coming back on Monday, and we started talking to them about how they can put some guidelines in their syllabus. And our big thing is to say, communicate to your students. That's the best thing that you can do. We don't have one like, here's what we're doing. We have the academic integrity policy, which is pretty cut in stone. But what we really want faculty to do is, how do you want to apply that academic integrity policy in your course, in your class? And really think about that. Maybe even have a discussion with students about how to use AI. Because Carrie, you're absolutely right. AI is going to be part of the fabric of our society from now on. And so how can we use it in ways that are productive instead of destructive? And
Yeah.
I think the academic integrity to me is kind of put to the side. I'm really more concerned about the data and the bias in data, and getting our students to really tackle that. Because if they understand that AI is just a machine that's just gathering data from all sorts of sources and pulling it together to answer something, they might not be thinking holistically about what they're answering. So I think it's really an opportunity to bring into the classroom thinking around AI and how our society is really going to function into this. So I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the research that's going to be done around it. And I don't really want to do policy as much as guidelines. And like I said before, everything should be written in pencil because it is moving at the speed of light.
Yes, that's the truth. Thank you. That is such the truth. So Van, you're at the front and center as a strategic partner to many academic leaders and institutions. And of course, your organization just completed its nationwide study. So what are you seeing and what are the best practices in terms of AI policy and guidelines?
I love how Melody started us out by reminding us that what we're doing is developing these things in pencil. The field is moving so quickly that we can't do what I think we often do in higher ed, and that's create a policy and then sort of set it and forget it.
Yeah.
That's just not going to work this time. We're going to have to continually iterate on any sort of policy positions that we create. I think that means that on the academic side, those guidelines are going to be really critical. Having said that, though, I think that there are some policy areas that institutions need to be thinking about and that we're having conversations with our members about. One of those has to do with data privacy and security. It should go without saying that these large language models are constantly either have scraped information off of the web to train themselves, and are continually using any information we put in them to train themselves. And that means that we need to really think very carefully, both faculty and staff, about putting in FERPA information into these models, and also having a conversation with our students about what data privacy means in an artificial intelligence world. I think related to that is having conversations with our students about sovereignty of their own data, and being very transparent with students about how AI is being used on a campus, how it's being used in classes, doing that from day one, and giving students the opportunity for alternative assignments if they're not comfortable with the way that that generative AI is going to be leveraged. So, we're really urging folks to get beyond just talking about academic integrity. That's sort of the gateway drug, I think, into creating policy. But we can't afford to stay there. We've got to start thinking about privacy, security, intellectual property, and all of these other issues around accessibility as well.
That's so perfect. What a great lead in for Jim to make your comments. You focus heavily on safety and equity, and you definitely look at a more global view. Love to hear how your work is helping to shape policy and what you're seeing.
I'm sure. Yeah. First, I'll clarify two things, right? So one is that I'm a former college dean, dean of student affairs, and it turns out it's hard to stop thinking like one when you're working in other areas. And so I think the things that Melody and Van have said, I'd say +1 to all of that. I will plant the seed for something that I think folks should also be thinking about, which is that artificial intelligence and voice recognition systems and video kind of creation systems are also going to lead us, I think, into some very treacherous and awful new areas in terms of misinformation and bullying. So if social media was bad, imagine social media plus AI, like on steroids, right? So we have a number of things that we're going to need to work our way through or to try to prepare for. The second thing I think is that, the EdSafe AI Alliance is a global network of about 250 organizations from 20 different countries. And we span from early childhood through K-12 into post-secondary, some adult learning and kind of lifelong learning, nonprofits and for-profits in the technology, innovation, and tech space, some people who bring more of a policy and advocacy orientation. So it is like the best graduate school seminar that you've ever participated in, and that there are a lot of different points of view and perspectives that come, and there's both a segmental kind of comparison between K-12 and post-secondary, as well as international kind of comparative approach that takes place. And the reason why we put the Alliance together as this volunteer network is that we wanted to stimulate a conversation, recognizing that we have what some of my friends in psychology refer to as a jingle jangle fallacy. Sometimes we use the same words and we mean different things. Sometimes we use the same words and we mean different things. And only through conversation do we really kind of drill down to what we mean, and what we mean and how we explain that is absolutely essential to having effective policy, right? So we have to get to some common set of definitions. The way that we are hoping that we're informing the education sectors where the real work gets done, which Melody and Dan represent, is by providing access to that broader conversation so that people can then go back and kind of work within their networks and campuses and schools to engage others, as Melanie alluded to engage others in creating the local policies, right? Because policy works when people understand it and when they can see themselves in it, and when they take a sense of shared responsibility for it. So that's the big picture of what we're looking at. I would say that a secret part of my past is that as a dean, I was on the board for the National Center for Academic Integrity. So my advice there is that if you're concerned about academic integrity, you have to be concerned on at least two dimensions. One, what are we doing to promote integrity, to promote honesty? Because there are people who will not cheat no matter what opportunities you give them. And at the same time, there is a small minority who will cheat anytime there's an opportunity and they perceive that there's a low risk of being detected, right? And most people are somewhere in the middle, and things become very circumstantial. And we know from research that students will cheat or bend the rules or ignore the rules if they feel like an assignment has been given to them as busy work, or where the expectation is it's just going to be reviewed and there'll be a check mark put in some grading sheet someplace, or if they feel like it's something that everyone is doing, so they would actually be a fool not to do it, right? If everyone's doing it and the instructor may be at least somewhat aware of that. So it's essential as educators that we explain to people why integrity matters to us, that assignments are there to give students a chance to practice and test their thinking. And as instructors, it gives us a chance to evaluate them on their own effort and work. And that ultimately, if they cheat, they're really cheating themselves, right? They're cheating in that instance, but they're cheating themselves in terms of bypassing the opportunity to learn and use that time effectively. And I would say time that, by the way, they or their parents have paid for, right? So it's a complicated bundle of things that we need to get to help students understand why we have the rules in place that we do. And often, I think it's wonderful to have it in the syllabus. It's absolutely essential that instructors speak when they have the opportunity in person or online with their students about why it matters to them personally, because it is a much higher stakes activity to cheat when you know that you're offending someone else's sensibilities, right, than it is if it's just something that will float by undetected. So.
Cool. So that's very, This is a really helpful context to start this. So Brett, I'm going to turn it back to Brett again. We're going to turn back to our participants here. So Brett, why don't you lead this piece here?
Great. And let's make sure we've got the link in the chat where we'll go to this Padlet. Great. You've got it. So let's jump into the Padlet. And for those 3 areas related to the framework for AI policy, let's go ahead and have you add some of your thoughts. You've been great at doing that in the chat. So add some of those same things or some new thoughts that you might have. And this will be an example of one of the things that we'll have captured and that we'll share with you as an ongoing resource after the fact.
By the way, some of you may not be familiar with Padlet. Padlet is a tool that we use a lot. It's like a online whiteboard discussion board, and it's really easy to use and just add your thoughts and onto it. Just hit the plus button and just type away and give your thoughts on the government's operational and pedagogical.
Yeah, this is great for synchronous activities, live activities like this. It can be used asynchronously. It can be group. It can be individual portfolios. Many uses for Padlet that you can discover out there. And we're going pretty deep into the teaching and learning outcomes side, which kind of maps to what was happening into the chat. A lot being said about, how do you know if you're reading a student's work, and some response as well. What about doing more authentic assessments, or what about having supplementary assessments? So it's not just one mode where students might really lean in and try and game that mode or cheat. And it's always better anyway if we can have more formative assessments and more authentic assessment taking place, which then also helps to lead toward the profession, the workplace, and things like that.
Yeah, I love the fact that, go, please, Melody.
As people are filling this out, last night I was sitting in a lovely hot tub underneath the stars with a bunch of K-12 educators. And sometimes I think we can learn so much from our K-12 educators. And we had such a good dialogue about helping students with digital literacy skills. And I was talking to a second grade teacher, and I was like, "Oh, I'm teaching a freshman class this year," and we were comparing about how second graders and freshmen are kind of alike in a lot of ways, like attention up here, and But I think that's something that we in higher education need to really start engaging our K-12 partners and talking to them about digital literacies, and even what we're doing with AI in the universities to get that culture to start coming around with AI and how it can be used. So, because a lot of times those K-12 students won't make it into the higher education, and yet they're still going to need to know how to navigate the AI world that we're going into. Just thought I'd add that because it was so much fun last night.
Yeah. I love the fact that earlier in the opportunities, the words critical thinking came up, because and Jim, you were referring to just really advancing the current practices around assessment and how we assess students. But, content is ubiquitous, and it has been for a long time. So if you assume that students are using tools to surface content that they need, then the learning activities and everything you do has to be more geared towards what you do with that content and how you use it. And that's complicated, but that as you think about policies, that should be what you're thinking about, is how to do it. I wonder if any of you have seen, just practices such as asking students to tell you when they turn in an assignment, did they use AI in that, and how did they use it? And is that something that's being done at institutions?
I think that's something that's being done at a lot of institutions. And I think in addition to that, some of the really good, promising practices also involve not just students saying what they did, how they did it, that they used it, but how they used it, and including the prompts that they used and the editing process that they used, so that students are actually really engaged in critical thinking around how they're using these tools, not just sort of using them willy-nilly.
Yeah, and to build on that, Van, so I haven't seen research on higher ed faculty yet, but in the K-12 sector, the early evidence suggests that there's a higher proportion of teachers that are using ChatGPT and other kind of LLM enabled tools than there are students. And so I think that it creates a unique situation where an instructor can say, here are the rules for this class. Here's how I'm using GPT, if I am either constructing the syllabus or identifying particular content or doing any other number of things. And to articulate for students, like under what conditions can you use it, or what are the expectations? If you do use it, as you're saying, tell me about how you're using it and how much you used it. And I think that opens up a very different dialogue and a chance for people to really engage each other at this really formative stage as we think about what rules and policies apply. Because I think there are going to be students, especially in their in college universities, this is for everyone, as you go from one classroom to another, there is no even baseline or uniform baseline of expectations for how GPT can or cannot be used, right? And students are going to have to make sense out of that for themselves. And I think this is one of the ways that we can, by being transparent, I think it's one of the ways we can get to actually a more reasonable set of expectations for each other.
Yeah. Brett, do you see this is there's so much going on so quickly in this Padlet, but I do see when it comes to governance, I see a lot of issues around making sure that there's good guidance around the use of detection software. I see a lot of it around just making sure that that data privacy is taken into consideration, and things like data privacy, academic freedom, that are just the foundations of higher ed. Brett, what are you seeing here?
Yeah, I'm seeing more around privacy and data. Campuses trying to be thoughtful about which tools are better to use than others as far as student data that might be entered out into an external tool and data set. Some are implementing their own LLMs to have their own instances so that data will stay within their ecosystem. So there are some strategies there for sure. I also saw a comment about the regulations for regular and substantive interaction, RSI, which came out, I believe, July 2022, where if your program has federal funding, or by way of any of your students having federal funding like financial aid, then you need to make sure that you have a certain level of regular and substantive interaction. So then AI came into that picture as well, but there's not really clear guidance on RSI to begin with. So it's hard to say where AI fits within RSI. And yeah, Van's shaking his head. We've had this conversation recently. And so that one's still very fuzzy, if you will.
So I'm going to turn, I think we've got 20 more minutes or so, maybe a little less. So I'm going to turn into some questions for the, if we can leave the Padlet. I will say that operationally, a lot of what was talked there has to do with training. So we'll ask a few questions about that. So I'd like to just start with, and not everybody has to answer these questions, so panelists, please jump in. But, when you're thinking about guidelines and policies, how can higher ed institutions ensure that the use of AI in courses is, and as well as in administration, and as well as in the academic work in general, is fair, equitable, and ethical? Anyone have some thoughts on that?
Well, that's a big one.
They're all big ones. This could be a 2-day seminar.
It really could. And I think it goes back to, really relating to your students, communicating to your students, finding out where they are. Crystal in the chat said, we're making an assumption that everybody's using generative AI, and that's not always the case. I will be having a 50 freshmen this year that I'm teaching this fall, and I'm really interested to hear from them, to be like, hey, are you really using this? How are you using this? And I think it's when you get to that equity question, you really need to talk to the people that you're using it with. Don't just throw this huge blanket over it and say, okay, here's the big policy, or here's what we're going to do with it. I think it needs to come down to more of that human level and really getting to know, I can't wait to get in the classroom and start talking to my students about this. I'm teaching a general education class, so I'm having students from all over, from all disciplines. How are you going to be using this in your discipline? How are you going to be using this in your life? And the life question is huge, because I have a friend that's like, oh, I had to prepare meals for my husband and he's got all of these health issues. And she went to ChatGPT and she typed in all of his health issues and she goes, can you make me a menu? And they came up with a menu. And then she was like, well, wait a second, that isn't right. He can't do this and that. And she kind of worked with generative AI to get exactly what she needed. And then she got the grocery list, right? So I think there's so many things that we can do on that, area of equity, but we need to be person to person, class to class, and faculty to faculty. I mean, we just need to be talking about it like I was doing in the hot tub last night. It was a great conversation. Talk with everybody about it and get everybody's insight.
Yeah, and be ready for things to move quickly or continue to change, right? So that by the time this year's first year students graduate, LLM systems being embedded into Google Docs and Microsoft Word and other core pieces of technology that we all use, that will have happened already, right? So you can, in certain ways, if you're telling students not to use GPT or similar large language model systems, it would be like telling them not to use the spell check, right? Or the automated autocorrect system within a word processing document. It is going to be more and more a part of everyday life. So figuring out, how and when and under what circumstances something's appropriate to use is one part. As Melody is pointing out, it's also important to break it down for them what it is, because it's a probabilistic mathematical formula based on content that the machine found on the internet. It is not an all-knowing, wise, inclusive, sage system of information. So the few students who I've had a chance to speak with over the course of the summer, as well as some teacher and college faculty friends, I said, so my advice if I were a dean today would be to say to students, if you're content turning in an average or mediocre paper, please use this system, because that's what it will give you. It's derivative of things that the machine has found on the internet from a wide variety of sources. It is not something that you should use to demonstrate your own capacity for critical thinking or creativity, right? And it will be important for us to let students know about some of the real world issues that have already popped up. The language limitations of the root information that are available in these systems means that it has all of the societal biases of content that lives on the internet. If you ask GPT today for pictures of what does a doctor look like, the odds are you're going to get a picture of 4 gray-haired old white men, right? It is not a diverse representative system. If I've friends in the K-12 learning world whose research teams have experimented with GPT, and when they've prompted the system to give them content that might be personalized for a particular student, the more demographic detail they provide about the student, the more biased the AI systems become. They use language and descriptions that suggest a perspective that all people of color come from lower income communities, right? There are some baked in things that we need to be deeply skeptical about, and we need to work with the technology field to fix those things, or to find a way to bracket them so they don't do any harm. Right? And I think the more students know that we're being critical about this, we can show them how they can be critical about it. I think they're more likely to be, kind of more wise or more effective in their use in the future.
Excellent. So, what infrastructure and resources are needed to support the effective use of AI in higher ed? And maybe Van, since you haven't spoken for a while, you could start with that.
Well, I think first of all, opportunities for collaboration across campus communities, and not just opportunities across academic disciplines, but truly opportunities for collaboration across all of the different aspects of the campus community. Student affairs needs to be involved in this conversation. Academic affairs needs to be involved in it. Your IT department needs to be involved in it. Your chief information officer and security officer needs to be involved in it. And most importantly, and I think we oftentimes leave this group out of these conversations, students need to be involved in these conversations. about creating institutional guidelines and policies. So I think that's the first thing.
Mhm.
I think the second thing is there need to be training opportunities for faculty and staff and students. And you can find some very creative ways of creating that training, leveraging training that already exists. I think we can be creative in how we incentivize that training. And I think that we need to make sure that we are also putting that training out, not just to our full-time faculty and staff, but our adjuncts as well.
Right.
And that's oftentimes a group that is overlooked, unfortunately, when it comes to professional development opportunities.
Very cool. I'm gonna turn over, it's 10 up, so I'm gonna turn, we're gonna talk pedagogical, but I want to take, and then what I'm gonna do is ask each of the panelists to give their parting words of advice to institutions that are trying to develop policy. But before we talk about pedagogical, since Alchemy lives in pedagogical, I wanted to just give you a moment on what we're doing in terms of AI. Aside from hosting this series, we're very thrilled to be part of the discussion and have had just tremendous hundreds and hundreds of people at each of our panels and webinars. But so many of you may not know who we are, but at Alchemy, we're committed to helping institutions roll out AI in teaching and learning. And our mission is to empower educators to deliver human-centric, inclusive, and engaged learning. And that has the highest impact on student success. So we've created a platform called Curie and a set of services and solutions that help faculty save time as they iterate and improve the teaching experience and the learning experience. And as importantly, help institutions advance their initiatives, imperatives, and policies. So AI is really important here as institutions at their policies. So in our platform Curie, we've created a set of teaching optimizers, basically wizards or workflows that save faculty time as they prepare to teach. And we're incorporating ChatGPT into these optimizers and including prompts that enable faculty to enhance what they're doing and augment what they're doing and personalize what they're doing. Anything from a syllabus to an inclusivity statement to an active learning practice to a discussion, et cetera. And then the other thing we're doing is we're in the process of developing optimizers for creation of media and interactive content that will in the near future enable educators to use AI to enhance scripts and also to surface appropriate images and to surface video clips and snippets to bring into their classes. So we're really committed to this, and I think it's really important that we as a community share out. And as we always have, we'll be sharing some of what we're doing. Some of it is behind a paywall, but a lot of what we do, we try to share. And I think it's important. And one of the things we've seen, I mean, I'm so excited to see here all the different sets of resources. And in the chat, we've developed a set of resources, including well-written prompts that Brett's been working on a lot that faculty can use. So I just want to take a moment there because we live in the heart of pedagogy. But now I'm going to ask one more pedagogy question, and then actually I'm going to have us wrap up now because we could talk pedagogy forever, and I do want this to end by 3. So I'd like each of you to give your parting words of advice to institutions that want to get started on or are moving forward with policies and guidelines. And Jim, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll try to address this as a former kind of campus practitioner, right? Because I think one of the things that my staff colleagues sometimes told me was that they lived in fear of me going to a conference or meeting because I'd come back with ideas for new things that we needed to do that were layered on top of the other priorities that we had right at the beginning of the year. I think this is a pretty unique time in the history of education where we need to prioritize the time that we need to spend together, kind of working on, as both Melody and Van have described, inclusive processes where people can roll up their sleeves together and not just, this is a non-routine event, right? So it is going to take more time and we have to be in it for the long haul. So my advice, to campus leaders and administrators is to understand that we have a long distance to go. We're going to keep a pretty big, aggressive pace in moving things forward, but it means we have to have the infrastructure in place to be able to sustain that dialogue and get the work done. We're going to have to choose priorities among the different issues for either those things that are so urgent they need quick attention, or so important to us that we have to get started now. And it may mean that some issues have to move to the second or the third round as we work our way through this. I do think that because the stakes are high in terms of data privacy and security on the one hand, and really having things that work for all students, where accessibility and equity are essential, that leads to a deeper set of conversations that we need to have on our campuses as well. So I would say, buckle up, get ready for a long trip together. Start by defining the issues carefully, establish the ground rules for assuming goodwill, among participants in the discussions, and really push to get to some clarity. And share information across campuses, because we don't need to do this 4,000 separate times. I think we can learn from each other if we're willing to share some information.
Thank you. Van, your parting words of advice.
A few things. I think, first of all, move beyond academic integrity conversation. We cannot afford to stall out in our campus conversations there. There's just too much that's at stake. Break down silos. Don't forget to include students in those conversations. I think doubling down on conversations about what a new digital literacy looks like, particularly in terms of creative thinking. Make sure that our students understand what algorithmic bias is. Not only is that going to be critical for how they leverage AI in their classes, but it's just going to make them a good citizen if they understand algorithmic biases. More and more of these algorithms make their way out into the wilds of our world. And I think the last thing is really think about, I just really emphasize again, thinking about critical thinking and getting students to engage in critical thinking across the curriculum so that they don't just trust what they hear, but they become really good consumers of information.
Very good. And Melody, last but not least.
Yes, my internet is kind of wonky, so I'm just going to be talking to you.
Sounds
I am
good.
putting something in the chat. These are some guidelines that we are giving to our faculty that are going to be on our website. That's going to be launching on Monday. But I think it's really important that you really talk to your faculty as they're coming back to campus. You tell them, calm down and carry on. So many people are getting, so just, they're coming back and they're so afraid. And I'm like, no, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Let's just, calm down, carry on. Some of these guidelines that we're having, faculty, use it, get in there and dive into it and have fun with it. It's really a black hole. It's so fun to play with. But there are some cautions. And I think, we're trying to tell them how to caution their students and how to use it effectively, efficiently, and in a way that will be authentic as students go out into their first career or onto graduate school or wherever they go. So I think it's going back to that conversation and really just bringing the human part into the artificial intelligence. I think I put in the chat, I will tell my students they can use artificial intelligence, but what I really want is authentic intelligence, and that's only going to come from them. So I'll end it with that. And thank you. This has been really delightful. I would love to have that chat. That chat is blowing up over there, and I would love to get all the tidbits out of that chat.
Yeah.
So I hope we'll have access to that. So thank everybody for participating.
Well, thank you, Melody. And you certainly will. Everyone here will have access to the chat. By the way, there have been a lot of questions about that. We provide access to the chat, the resources and that have surfaced during it, and the streamed recording that you can share out with your colleagues. We provide that after each of our webinars. And plus there will be access for everybody for our whole entire webinar series. Also, a couple of ideas have come up during this, and we will be having more webinars. I mean, and not only that, and panel discussions, more panel discussions, because I love that format. And also, we'll think about how we turn this into a community practice so we can continue the dialogue beyond these amazing chats. And I want to thank everyone for being here. And Brett, do you have anything to say? I thank you, and it's just been a wonderful conversation today. And I particularly thank, Melody and Jim and Van for your wisdom, and continue to write that wisdom down in pencil. And Brett, do you have anything last to say?
No, just echo, great panel and great knowledge and expertise, but I just love how you acknowledge each other as well. And that sharing and no ego involved, and the spirit of the community here in the webinar chat, just sharing and sharing. So we will definitely glean and share that back out with you. So thank you.
Thank you.